These three disturbing Appalachian Trail horror stories are inspired by real events. First, we uncover the trail's only double murder, a shocking, brutal execution of two hikers at their shelter, a crime made even more chilling by the killer's terrifying return years later. Next, an experienced hiker steps just 60 yards off the path and is swallowed by the woods, documenting 29 agonizing days in a journal as rescuers, unheard, pass just 100 feet away. And finally, a meticulous engineer vanishes from his tent, but the search dogs reveal a deeply disturbing clue. Make sure you watch until the very end, because the scent trail didn't just fade, it stopped cold at a remote logging road, and what that implies is far worse than just being lost. They were experienced section hikers on the Appalachian Trail when a local man approached their campsite in northern New Hampshire. He shot them a total of 18 times, then stabbed and bludgeoned them. He served only 20 years. In 2018, he attacked two more hikers on the same trail. This is the only double murder in Appalachian Trail history, a chilling crime from 1985. So let's unpack that. Let's talk about what really happened piece by piece, because the details matter. The victims were Kenneth and Linda, both 28 years old. These weren't kids out on a weekend lark. They were teachers from Vermont. They were smart, capable, and experienced. They were section hikers, which means they knew the woods, they knew the gear, and they knew the rules. This was their element. Their plan was a long one. They'd started up in Maine and were hiking their way south, aiming for the trail's midpoint in Pennsylvania. It was late April 1985, and they were high up in the mountains of northern New Hampshire, deep in the wilderness. The spot was called the Lost Stream Shelter. It's a simple lean-to, a place hikers use to get out of the weather, a dot on a map miles from any road. When you're that far out, you rely on an unspoken trust. You're all in it together. You look out for each other. It's the only way it works. That trust is the first thing that got shattered. Kenneth and Linda set up their camp. They were settling in for the night, probably making dinner, talking about the next day's miles. The sounds around them would have been all the normal ones. The hiss of their camp stove, the rustle of the wind in the trees, maybe an owl. Just quiet. And then a man walked out of the trees. His name was Paul. He was 31. He wasn't a hiker. He wasn't carrying a pack. He was a local guy, and he had a reputation, a bad one. He was known for bothering hikers, just messing with people who were passing through. Imagine that moment. You're miles from anyone, finally relaxing, and this guy just shows up. The whole feel of the place changes. The sound of a new voice just cuts through the peace. You have to be polite, right? You're in the middle of nowhere. You can't start a fight. So you're polite, you're friendly, and you just wait. You wait for him to leave. You're trapped. You're trapped by simple good manners, and you're trapped by the 50 miles of empty forest around you. A shout wouldn't matter. Nobody's coming to help. That's a bad, bad feeling. The dread of just having to sit there and hope this known creep, this person who just radiates wrong, will get bored and move on. We don't know exactly how that first night ended. Maybe he left. Maybe he lingered. But the real horror, it started on April 28th. What happened at that shelter wasn't a robbery that went bad or a fight that got out of hand. This was something else entirely. It was a methodical, brutal, planned-out assault. The attack started with the sound of a gunshot, a .22 caliber rifle. Not a huge gun, but in the hands of someone who means it, it's deadly. That sharp, flat crack must have been deafening, echoing off the mountains. It wasn't one shot. It wasn't two. This was an execution. The evidence they found at the scene, it tells a story that's hard to even think about. Kenneth, he was shot 11 times. 11. The killer didn't stop when he fell. He just kept pulling the trigger. And Linda, she was shot 7 times. That's 18 shots in total. 18 times that rifle cracked in the morning quiet. But the rifle wasn't enough for him. Even after the gun was empty, he kept going. The attack escalated. It got more personal. He wasn't done. The bodies of Kenneth and Linda also had wounds from being stabbed and from being bludgeoned, hit over and over with a heavy object. This wasn't just killing. This was overkill. This was rage. It tells you everything you need to know about the man holding the weapon. This was pure, sick, unrestrained malice. Kenneth and Linda weren't just victims of a crime. They were subjected to a monstrous, hateful display of violence, completely helpless, in a place they had come to find peace. The immediate terror was over. The woods were quiet again, but the man's cold, calculating mind was still working. His first thought wasn't panic. It wasn't remorse. It was cleanup. He tried to cover his tracks. He tried to burn the bodies right there at the campsite. The smell, a thick, acrid chemical smell that must have just hung in that clean mountain air. He wasn't just hiding evidence. He was trying to erase them, to violate them one last time. When that didn't work, he did something else that shows you exactly who he was. He took their property. He stole their camping gear, their backpacks, the things they needed to survive out there. He took the possessions of the 2 people he had just butchered, and he just walked away from the lost stream shelter, leaving that nightmare scene behind for someone else to find. And someone else did. The next morning, a new set of hikers walked into the campsite. Can you even imagine? You're starting your day. The sun's up, the birds are singing. You walk into the next shelter, maybe looking to say hello, and you walk right into that. A fresh, brutal double murder. In a place where that kind of violence just isn't supposed to happen. These hikers, they didn't just find a crime scene. They had found the only double murder in the entire history of the Appalachian Trail. The investigation itself moved fast. This guy, Paul, he was brutal, but he was sloppy. He'd left his fingerprints all over the couple's car, which was still parked at the trailhead where they'd started their hike. That's what broke the case. They tracked him down. He wasn't in the woods anymore. He'd run. They arrested him in Boston, Massachusetts. And when they got him, guess what he had? He was still in possession of the stolen gear, the backpacks and equipment from Kenneth and Linda. It was an open and shut case. He was tried, and he was found guilty. 2 counts of second-degree murder. For what he did. For the 18 shots, the stabbing, the bludgeoning. He was sentenced to 40 years. But here is where the story tips over. This is where it gets truly, deeply horrifying. The killer, Paul, did not serve 40 years. He served 20, half his sentence. In 2005, a man who had committed one of the most brutal crimes in New Hampshire history, a man who had proven what he was capable of, was released. He was just let go. And the system knew. This wasn't a clerical error. He had psychiatric evaluations. Doctors, professionals, people who are paid to know these things, they wrote reports. They said he remained a danger to the public. They warned against it. And the system let him out anyway. So, a man who had murdered 2 innocent people in cold blood, who had mutilated their bodies, was back on the street. The horror of 1985 didn't end. It just went quiet for a while. It went dormant. The warnings from the doctors were ignored. And in 2018, 13 years after he was released, the man who killed Kenneth and Linda proved that those doctors were right. He proved he was still a monster. He attacked again. And he did it in the exact same place, on the Appalachian Trail. He shot 2 more hikers. This second attack, it was a direct, sickening echo of the first. A horrifying, complete failure of the justice system to contain a man they knew was evil. This time, the victims were lucky. They survived. Paul was caught right away, charged with the new crime. But there was no second trial. He died in custody while he was waiting. This whole case, from '85 to 2018, it became a dark landmark. It's in books and documentaries. It's still the only double murder in the trail's history. It's the reason you see all those safety warnings now, especially for people hiking alone or as a couple. The tragic, infuriating fact is that the danger was known. The man was known, and the system failed. They let him go. The Appalachian Trail is still a beautiful place. Thousands of people hike it every year and have the time of their lives. But for anyone who knows this story, the woods they don't feel the same. The sound of a footstep on the trail behind you, it just sounds a little heavier. The silence between the trees, it feels a little too loud, like it's holding its breath, like it's carrying a warning. She was 60 yards from the Appalachian Trail when she got lost going to the bathroom. She survived 29 days alone in the wilderness. Rescuers passed within 100 feet of her makeshift shelter. Her body wasn't found for 2 years. Her journal documented everything. This is verified by State Park Service reports and her recovered diary. This is the story of Audrey. She was 55, an experienced section hiker from New Mexico. She knew what she was doing. She wasn't a novice. She and her husband, David, were out on a long stretch of the Appalachian Trail, making good time. The date was June 13th, 2015. The location was near Loft Mountain in Virginia's Shenandoah National Park. The weather was warm. The trail was clear. Everything was fine. It was normal. It was predictable. But the wilderness doesn't care about normal. It just waits for one small mistake. Audrey needed to step off the trail. It's a simple, universal human need. It was the single fatal misstep. She left the path, walked about 60 or 100 yards into the dense trees. When she turned to go back, the trail was gone. Just gone. She looked one way, then another. Everything looked the same. A solid, seamless wall of green. The trail, which had been right there, had vanished. The sounds of the busy trail, other hikers, the wind in the high branches, were suddenly muffled by the thick, dense leaves of the forest. It created an unsettling, heavy blanket of silence. In the space of a few minutes, she was completely, terrifyingly alone. She tried to retrace her steps, pushing back through the brush, but the ground was tangled and uneven. The sound of her own feet snapping twigs and crushing leaves was all she could hear. Every step just made her more lost. Panic started to set in, not as a scream, but as a hard, fast pulse that made the blood sound loud in her own ears. She did the one thing a modern person does. She pulled out her phone, the last lifeline. Her fingers, maybe already starting to shake, typed out a message to her husband, David. A cry for help that the world would never, ever hear. In some trouble. Got off trail to go to the bathroom, now lost. Can you call the park ranger to see if a trail maintainer can help me? Somewhere north of Woods Road, XOXO. She stared at the screen, waiting for the little bars to jump up, for the sent notification that meant help was coming. But the display stayed cold, empty, no cell service. The text sat there, an unread note to a world she could no longer reach. Her last connection to safety was severed. The isolation was immediate and total. The first night, the darkness was thick. It wasn't just dark, it was a total blackness that felt like a physical weight. The ground was hard and cold. She tried to find a landmark, a sound, anything that didn't feel like endless, repeating trees. But every direction was just more wilderness. She was experiencing the absolute terror of helplessness. Her husband, David, would be hours down the trail by now, completely unaware of the crisis. This was perfectly normal for them. They loved hiking together, but it was just as common for them to separate on the trail. One might be faster, or want to stop and look at something, or step off the path for a minute, just like Audrey did. It was completely normal for one to go on and the other to stay behind, knowing they'd catch up later. They both trusted each other's experience completely. So David was just hiking on, trusting the routine, trusting the experience of his wife. That trust was now a cruel, agonizing joke the forest was telling just to Audrey. Days turned into a week. Her meager supplies vanished. The hunger started as a distraction, a constant, hollow ache. Then it became a dull, exhausting presence that never left. She started to write in her journal. It was an act of recording her descent, but it was also a battle, a fight to hold on to her own sanity, to prove she was still there. The cold was the relentless enemy. Even on the warm June and July days, the damp forest floor and the long nights brought a bone-deep chill. She found a small, sheltered spot. The reports would later show it was approximately 2,600 feet from the Appalachian Trail, less than half a mile. She began to gather branches and leaves, creating a makeshift shelter. It was barely more than a pile of sticks and damp earth, but it was her only defense against the slow, deliberate action of exposure. The clammy, cold dampness of the earth seeped through her clothes and settled deep into her bones. It made her shiver even when she was trying to lie perfectly still. Then came the psychological torture. It was almost unbearable. One day, she heard the sound of people, voices, faint, distorted by the wind and the trees, but clearly voices, rescuers. They were calling out, maybe her name. Hope is a raw, desperate, burning thing. It made her scramble out of the shelter. She started to yell, screaming until her voice tore. She pushed toward the sound, toward the promise of salvation. The sound of her own cries was desperate in the empty woods, but the trees held the sound. They swallowed her desperate cries just like they had swallowed her sight of the trail. Later, the Park Service reports would confirm the agonizing truth. Rescue teams passed within 100 feet of Audrey's small camp. Multiple times, she had been right there, within touching distance of safety. She could hear them, and they could not hear her. She was missed because the forest had decided to keep her. That realization must have been worse than any physical pain. It was the peak of her helplessness. Seeing the answer, the rescue, the life she needed, and being utterly unable to grasp it. It was the confirmation that the world was no longer orderly or rational. The relentless cold and hunger took their final toll. The journal entries grew shorter. The script wavered, faint. She had survived for 29 agonizing days. 29 days of fighting the woods, the weather, and her own mind. But the wilderness always wins a battle of attrition. The last desperate fight was over. The feeling of the cold was no longer a shock. It was just a permanent layer of her existence. The hunger was a dull, constant emptiness that had become normal. The story didn't end with her passing. It ended 2 years later, 2 years of seasons changing, 2 years of the trees growing, the forest floor burying her tiny camp in leaves and soil. It was October 2017 when a hunter, walking off the path where no one had been looking, stumbled across the remains of the shelter. Inside the small stick-and-leaf cocoon, they found her remains. They also found the journal, a complete and detailed record of a fight against oblivion. The final entry, written on July 12, 2015, was stripped of all fear, all hope, all extraneous detail. It was simply the last cold plea of a person who had fought the good fight and lost. "When you find my body, please call my husband David." It's the worst kind of truth because it leaves you with a profound sense of wrongness. It's a verified, true story of a human being who was 100 feet from safety, but was left alone in the dark for 2 years. The next time you're alone, whether you're camping in the woods or just a few steps from your back door at night, remember how easily the world can turn into a cold, dark place that just doesn't hear you. Remember how thin that line is between home and lost. Remember Audrey. He was Theo, 55, a retired railroad engineer from Indiana, who vanished from the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania in June 2022. His tent was found abandoned. His backpack, wallet, and phone disappeared with him. Search dogs tracked his scent to a logging road, then nothing. Over 150 volunteers searched for 4 weeks. He's still missing. This is an active investigation documented by the Pennsylvania Game Commission. That's the official report. But to really understand how wrong this whole thing is, you have to go back. You have to understand the man. A man's life can be a straight line. Some people, they live like that. They trust schedules. They follow a plan. They believe deep down that a line always leads to a predictable place. That was Theo. His entire 55 years were built on that idea. He was a retired railroad engineer. Think about that job. His whole career was spent guiding massive, powerful things on fixed metal routes. He was a master of routine, a master of certainty. He wasn't the kind of guy to just wander off. Every part of his job was about rules, checklists, making sure A connects to B on time, every time. So when he decided to hike the Appalachian Trail, it wasn't some midlife crisis. It wasn't a spontaneous trip. For Theo, it was a project. It was a new track, laid out clear and long, and he was a man who respected the plan. He was an experienced hiker. He was prepared. He was attempting a northbound through hike, and he was doing everything by the book. That trail, it runs right through a strategic trail town called Duncannon in Pennsylvania. Just another stop on the line. June 17th, 2022. That's the last day anyone can confirm they saw him. It's important to note the conditions. The weather was clear. It was mild. There was no storm. There was no fog. There was no extreme event that would make a man of his experience get into trouble. Other hikers, people just like him, saw him at the shelter near Duncannon. They talked to him. They later told investigators he was in good spirits. He was just another guy like them, chasing the long miles. When he got into his tent for the night, he did the last thing a predictable man does. He checked in. A man of routine follows his routine. He sent a text message to his family. "I'm safe. Good night." That message, that simple little ping of safety, was the final word from a rational world. After that, the line went dead. 9 days, think about that, 9 days. A man who loves routine, a man who had a plan for every single mile of this trip, doesn't respond. For 9 days, there's just nothing. His family, back in Indiana, must have gone from confusion to annoyance to a deep, terrible worry. A man like Theo doesn't just go dark. On June 26th, 9 days after that last text, the family finally had to make the call. He was missing. At first, you figure the search teams from the Pennsylvania Game Commission thought it was simple. They get these calls. It's the woods. People get hurt. A sprained ankle. A fall down a gully. Maybe he just got turned around happens to the best of them. But the more they learned, the less sense it made. They found his campsite. They got boots on the ground at the very last place Theo was known to be. The scene, it should have told a story of panic, a story of a desperate scramble, or a medical emergency. Instead, the scene told a story of quiet, impossible emptiness. His tent was still there, not packed away, not torn down by an animal, just abandoned. A veteran hiker doesn't just walk away from his shelter. That's your roof. That's your safety. That's the first thing that tells you something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. It's like finding a running engine on a stopped train. The energy is there, but the man is gone. The routine is corrupted, but the details got worse. They ran an inventory. You have to build a picture. What was still there? The tent, a few items of clothing, maybe a stove, the things a man could leave behind. But what was missing? The things a man needs to survive. The backpack was gone. The wallet was gone. The phone was gone. Now you stop and you think about that. This isn't a man who ran out into the dark in a blind panic hearing a bear. You don't grab your wallet if you're scared. This isn't someone who got confused and stumbled away, leaving his gear. This was an efficient subtraction. It was a complete gear transfer. This was someone who was planning to travel, and travel without delay. The real terror of that campsite was the vacuum. There was no struggle, no blood, no signs that Theo fought anything or anyone. The dirt was calm, the grass was untouched. There was no sound of a fight, no ripped canvas, no snapped branches. The quiet of that place was so heavy, it felt like the woods themselves were just holding their breath, keeping a secret. The search efforts, they started big. Then they got massive. The Pennsylvania Game Commission launched the search, but this wasn't just them. Over 150 volunteers showed up. Local people who knew that land, spent 4 solid weeks trying to find one man. They walked in lines, shoulder to shoulder, through 60+ square miles. That's a staggering amount of land. The only sound was their feet crunching the leaves, and their own voices shouting his name until their throats were raw. Theo! Nothing. They found nothing. Not a wrapper, not a footprint, no trace. Then they brought in the dogs. The search dogs are the closest thing you have to a guarantee in the wilderness. They're not human. They don't get confused by maps. They follow the scent. And they picked up Theo's scent right from that abandoned tent. A familiar human smell. The handlers let them go and the dogs went to work, snuffling and pulling. They had the trail. Finally, a real lead. They weren't just guessing anymore. The dogs were not confused. They pushed through the brush, following the path Theo took. It led them away from the camp, out of the main trail area, and it led them right to a nearby logging road. Just a simple dirt track, the kind of road that services the deep, quiet parts of the forest. The handlers were probably thinking the trail would cross the road, head back into the woods, but right there on the surface of that dirt road, the trail vanished. Just poof, gone. The scent didn't fade out. It didn't get lost in a stream or get scattered by the wind. The dogs whined and circled. They tried to find it again, but there was nothing to find. The scent stopped completely, like he was just erased. That single, abrupt break in the trail changed the whole case. It changed everything. It meant Theo didn't get lost. It meant he didn't collapse from a heart attack. It meant that at the edge of the forest, on that lonely logging road, a vehicle had been waiting. A man of fixed routes removed from his track. The whole search changed. The isolation was complete. The teams had been hunting for an error of nature, a fall, a fever, a wild animal. But that logging road, it pointed to an intentional human act. The very system Theo had spent his life trusting, the rule of order, the predictability of a journey, it had betrayed him. The search wasn't over, but the hope was. They kept searching for 4 long weeks, but what were they even looking for now? A body? A clue? The 150 volunteers are still looking, but the logging road changed the game. The family, desperate, put up a $20,000 reward. Someone must know something. But silence. The official search scaled back. The case remains an active missing person investigation. It's all in the reports. The Pennsylvania Game Commission reports, law enforcement reports, all these facts, all these details, and they add up to a big, empty zero. No trace found, despite that massive effort. The most terrifying truth is that every single piece of evidence in Theo's case, the abandoned tent, the missing pack, that sudden, impossible stop of the scent trail, it all tells you this was not chaos. This was a precise, terrifying, and successful operation. Theo, the man who built his life around fixed tracks, vanished in a way that violated every rule he ever knew. His story, it leaves you with a question. It's a question that drills right into the bedrock of your confidence. If a man can disappear so completely from a marked path, on a clear night, without a sound, and without a struggle, then how much do any of us really control the ground we stand on?